Hey guys, different t-shirt, different vibe, definitely more a relaxed vibe, definitely a more affirming vibe. So I think you're going to find this a strangely enjoyable space and a strangely enjoyable topic. I hope so. So, do you guys know about what happened with a Van Gogh painting? Are you guys aware of that? That a painting was defaced. It was actually the sunflowers, right? No, not that. That. And so we're going to deal with that, that it doesn't deserve to be covered in soup. I think I think there's a clip of that taking place. If I click on that, will it show it? You see that? Now, I quickly want to just mention that doing that, let me just go back to that. Try again. So why didn't it pause? Let me try one more time. So right at that moment, she could actually have damaged that painting if the side of the can or the tin had actually hit the painting. That could actually have damaged, I think, a 73 million pound painting. So she came, looks like she came about that close to actually striking the painting with the side of the tin. So we are going to deal with it, this particular aspect. I actually want to ask you guys a very simple kind of question. Do you think the past is precious? Do you guys think that the past is precious? I mean, we think about Van Gogh, but just other things as well. So this is from an article on CNN. I'll put a link to that in chat. And we're just going to look at a couple of pictures, and then we're going to get back to Van Gogh, right? Jody says, most certainly. Susanna, good to see you here. Robbie says it's sacred. Do you think the past is precious? So these are photos of the Orient Express that have been restored. I think I need to do that. Have a look at these photos. So this is a very old train. These carriages were discovered kind of in an abandoned train yard. And so obviously something from yesteryear that was found by a Orient Express buff. And he basically brought it out of anonymity, out of memory in a way, out of what's the word, the dust. And then they decided, because they were so in love with a kind of nostalgia, they decided to bring it back to life, to restore it, right? And that's what the story is all about. In 2015, a railway fan spotted carriages in a YouTube video, and then he went to track down the lost train, and then they worked to restore them, and they're set to operate in 2025. Now, I've got to say, I would love to go on that train. I would love to be part of that sort of journey. What do you guys say? Karina says, so lovingly redone. Renee says, I don't know much about Vincent. Okay. Well, you're going to learn a bit more if you stick around. Yvonne says, I feel like much of the past is like a time capsule full of treasure. What a great statement. That's so true. So that's kind of how we're going to go into this episode. we are going to move from the space where Vincent van Gogh finds out that, well, his father has died, but it's between the death of his father and the painting that he paints that basically finally acknowledges that, right? Just give me a moment to bring it up. It's the painting that he paints of the Bible and the Emile Zola book, right? And in other words, it's how he is dealing with the recent past, but also his past, right? You get that? So can you guys see that? So what you're going to try and do with the letters is get from the time of, not quite the time of Vincent's father's death. We're going a little bit beyond that. I think his father died in, was it April or May, somewhere around there. And then we're going to go to July and try and get to the point where he paints this painting. In other words, we're going to deal with Van Gogh's journey as an artist dealing with the death of his father. We're going to deal with how he deals with it, how he escapes with it, what he's thinking about, what he's not thinking about, right? In other words, we're going to deal to some extent with his denial, but also to some extent with his coping with it. Before we get to that, I just want to introduce you guys to some photos I've taken of the Weaver. And the reason I'm doing that is it feels a bit emblematic of where I am right now in my life. I feel a lot like this Weaver bird. I feel like I've built a lot of beautiful nests that I think were worth building and that were built sensibly and properly and that they were well executed. But for whatever reason, maybe they weren't built in the right place. Maybe they weren't built for the right person, in the Weaver's case, the right Weaver female, but they were built, and then about 7 of these beautiful nests were torn to shreds, and ultimately there's nothing to show for it. Like ultimately, it built 7 nests, and all of those nests were torn down. And I think Van Gogh felt a bit like that in his own life, that he worked so hard. That's why I think he was so upset with Van Rappard. He worked so hard on his painting, the Potato Eaters, that once it was done and Van Rappard criticized it, he felt like it wasn't deserving of that criticism. And the truth is that it was and it wasn't. I mean, Van Rappard isn't the world famous artist that Van Gogh is today. So Van Gogh had a point in being upset about the criticism, but nevertheless, Van Rappard did have a point that Van Gogh had a way to go, and then he did go that way, right? So it's quite interesting. So I've got to tell you let me bring up some of those photos. It's quite acrobatic, isn't it? That's kind of the same picture I've got as my background. Let me do this. So the reason when I moved into where I stay now, that I just planted a heck of a lot of trees, was I think I actually felt rootless. I felt I'd moved so many times in my life, and I wanted to be attached to some place. And I think the garden was a symbol of that. Anyway, it's quite heartbreaking that I watched this bird build nest after nest, and ultimately there are no nests, and it's not even in my garden anymore. It does come and visit, it does come and strip leaves for some other garden, but I would have liked the companionship and to have watched this bird bring young ones into the world. I would have liked that, and obviously we don't get to see that. So isn't that a nice photo? Capturing quite perfectly the weaver in the process of weaving. And obviously painstakingly did this over and over again. That is a spider that was right outside my window. You can see its body has been eaten away. But yeah, I actually saw this kind of spider yesterday, obviously a living one, outside the sliding door downstairs. But this spider to me is emblematic of the true crime space right now, just that it's crawling with sort of terrifying creatures that I don't really understand. And yeah, so you can see the dead leaves behind it, and this thing is a dead upside down spider. Anyway, there's another picture of it. Do you have any nicer pictures than that? Well, there's another one of the weaver. You can see what a job this must be to execute this nest while he's balancing. He's got to not tear this part to shreds. And this is the first part that he makes. He makes this sort of bow, right? He makes this sort of what can one call it? What do they call it? You sleep on a insult to innocent spiders. Yeah, no, they are innocent. What do they call it? If you sleep on a hammock. Yeah, it kind of looks like a hammock, right? So he's got to make that first, and then he starts making this part. And that is something that I thought would keep the weaver's interest. I often put peanut butter balls with seeds in them in this little cage, and then a lot of the birds come and eat here, but it seems like it didn't quite do the trick. And that's just some of the other signs of flowering in the garden. This is the bottle brush. I think it's endemic to Australia. Look at that fiery red. And I'm always pleased to see bees, because bees seem to be under siege these days. I really like that picture. The contrast of that of that picture. Is there anything else? Okay, so I'll show you guys more pictures later on, but for right now we're going to deal with Van Gogh. Okay, so we'll also come back to the defacing of the sunflowers painting, right? So if you guys want to follow, we are at the first half of July 1885. That's at this link, if you guys want to follow. I'm now going to bring this up a little bit bigger. Okay, so it's a letter to Anton van Rappard, and Van Gogh's not happy. Thanks a lot, Yvonne. Deborah says, I have them in my garden. The birds love them. Oh, bottle brush. Okay. They are endemic to Australia, right? Jody says, do you have a bird bath in your garden? Yes, I do. It actually often gets full of bottle brush, not petals, sort of needles. So I've often got to wash the red needles out of the bird bath. Susanna says another bird will make a nest in your garden. I've actually got two pairs that have made nests. So actually three if you include the swallows. So right now I've got 3 nests. I would have just liked this bird, but maybe next summer. Okay, shall we get going? Okay, following. Okay, cool. So this is what he writes. To my regret, I've not yet discovered any reply from you. So he's actually not very happy. The more I think about it, the more I feel that I shall personally not be at all sorry to be done with you. That's why I got the title for this video. He's basically trying to rescind their friendship. So he says, I won't be sorry to be done with you unless you withdraw once and for all a correspondence that, in my opinion, is sorry, is hardly a credit to you. So he's basically saying, if you don't say sorry for your review, your poor review of my work, then it's over. He says, I repeat that I'm willing to look upon the whole business as a misunderstanding and not to alter our friendly relations, provided that you realize yourself that you were mistaken. Feels a little bit like me versus the true crime community, doesn't it? Are you guys going to apologize? Apologize. Otherwise, I'm going to withdraw, right? Feels a bit like that. He says, and let's see if he does. It's a very short letter. He says, I don't want things to drag on any account. I beg you to answer me before the end of the week. So it's kind of putting pressure on him. I haven't heard from you. Why have you not withdrawn what you said? Please send me another letter. He says, I shall know according to the contents of your letter what to decide. In case you do not write this week, I no longer desire your reply. So if you don't respond, I'm going to know what the answer is to that, right? And then time will tell whether your remarks about my work and my person were justified or not, were made in good faith or not. Was there ever a truer word spoken about Vincent van Gogh than these words? Time will tell whether your remarks about my work were justified or not. Now, in a weird way, you can read that two ways. On the one hand, you could say, and I guess I would say it, sorry, Vincent, in my opinion, the potato eater still sucks. On the other hand, yes, you were, are, and would become an artist of substance. So it's true that you've got potential, but it's also true that that painting isn't the best that you can do. I don't know what you guys think about that. Yeah, that is a good one. I no longer desire your reply. So you could actually use that in certain comments. If you have one or two comments with someone you don't like, I no longer desire your reply. It's a very polite way of kicking someone to the curb, isn't it? Okay, so now we go on to the next letter. Mid-July. Dear Theo, the last time I wrote you, I was in such a hurry. Right now, I need all my time because I'm working a full 2 hours from here. What I want is to have some more beautiful hovels far away on the heath. On the heath. I'm really not sure what the heck he's talking about. He doesn't mean novels. Anyway, he says, I have 4 now, as large as the 2 I last sent you, and a few smaller ones. They are not yet dry, and I think I shall give them the finishing touches in the studio. But then I want to send them to you together with some figure studies to show the ladder to Serre. But now I want to tell you that for the present, as there are about 6 rather large paintings, I intend to make only small ones, especially because according to Raffaelli and Muntz and others, articles say at the last salon and in general, there were a great many enormous canvases. Now, if we stop right here, what do you think is going on with Van Gogh? His father has died. Where is his focus? Where is his heart? Where is his mind? Well, he seems very single-mindedly focused on his art, doesn't he? It seems like he can't, how does that saying go about brook a truck? He brooks no truck with Van Rappard's criticism, right? But in the same way, he is very focused on just getting back to business, art, right? And so what we want to look for is him revealing the other side. There's a kind of denial taking place here. There's a kind of suppressing a big event, the death of his father. So in a weird way, he's being liberated. He's coming out of the shadow of his father. But at the same time, there's the reality of death, which you don't just shake off. You don't just pass by and it doesn't come back to you. So we're going to feel and follow that journey through the next couple of letters. Okay, so he says, though I've not read this in one of the articles, this salon might perhaps be called Le Salon des Marchands de Couleurs. I should like to send you this lot before you come here, because otherwise so much time will be lost. And then I shall take up quite different subjects again. I think that you will see from the things I brought from the Heath that it is very characteristic here. The interiors are splendid. And now I've made some friends there among the people with whom I'm always welcome. How did it go with the money this month? I hope a little better than you expected, for it worried me when you wrote that you were hard up yourself. So there is a early indication that Theo, despite the death of their father, he's actually struggling financially. Now, bear in mind, in the context of this, Theo is continuing to support his brother. Now, you can actually imagine that Theo could, now that their father has died, Theo could basically have said to Vincent, dude, you're on your own. I was really looking after you because I was a good son, but you treated dad so badly that, and maybe you actually killed dad in the sense that you gave him so much grief that I blame you. I'm just saying you could have had that family dynamic emerge where, because there's a change, a significant change in the family dynamic, Theo would drift away from his brother, right? Because his brother was giving his family a heck of a lot of grief. The affair with the neighbor, the arguments with his father regarding all sorts of things. But instead, and we'll still find out whether that's going to be true, does Vincent and Theo, does their relationship deepen? Does the death of their father bring them actually closer together? Also, what is the impact of finances going to be on both of them? Is life going to be easier or is it going to be harder? Deborah says, I think he's conflicted that he didn't get his father's approval. I think that's true, but I also think that there's an element of freedom that he has now that he didn't have before. There's no one wagging his finger at him. There's no one, like you can't really imagine his mother and his sisters being able to dictate the way that his father would or could. And so there may be a certain sense of liberation from that, a certain sense of relief, but then also a sense of one that comes up slowly, gradually, a sense of loss, a sense of sadness, a sense of longing, right? And the question is, does this image capture that sadness? Look at that, the candle is out. Does this picture capture, what does it capture? Does it capture longing? Does it capture humility? Does it capture a sense of being dominated or forced or pushed around or pushed to the side, right? So he says, I had to pay so much in the beginning of this month and have only just 5 guilders left. And it is still a long time before the end of the month. So both brothers are actually struggling financially. In the aftermath to their father's death, they're struggling financially. They're struggling to survive. And next month I shall again have much to pay. I cannot and may not do otherwise than spend relatively much on models. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems kind of mischievous, if you ask me. At a time where his brother doesn't have much money and he doesn't have much money, guess what he's doing? He's spending money on models, which is another way of saying on babes. And who knows whether what he's going to do with some of that is screw around, right? Should he be spending money on models at this time? Or is that something that he's really been wanting to do and now he can? There's no one to chide him for doing that. So he goes on. So let me just ask you guys: do you think that it's good or wise in the current circumstances to be spending relatively much, in his own words, on models? Do you think that that is wise? What do you guys say? It is the same here as everywhere. People do not like to pose, and if it weren't for the money, nobody would. But as they are for the most part very poor, and especially many weavers are out of work, I can somehow manage to get them. But painting what I want, and especially improving the figures, is a question of money. Nisi, really good to see you here. Nisi says, thanks so much for incredible, hard, and authentic work. We all appreciate you so much. We're so lucky to have you. To me too. And so thankful for this wonderful group of people, TCRS, hashtag Peachtree, Team Peachtree. Cool. Thanks so much, Nisi. Also, welcome back. We haven't seen you for a while. We have seen you, but it's really good to have you in this community. Karina says not wise for sure, but important to him. Yeah, definitely. Yvonne says not wise, but that's Vincent sometimes. So you can see he's got his own. He's a passionate guy, but he's also a man. He's just a man with his passions, and I guess he's in a way trying to get his brother to finance a certain amount of mischief, right? So he goes on to say, did you read in Sensia's book that when Malay had the good fortune to inherit some 1,000 francs, instead of using it to make himself a little more comfortable, indeed he was poor enough, immediately set out on a trip to his native village in order to paint the peasants there again, and it swallowed up his whole legacy, and Malay was right. So if you ask me, there's a little bit of some kind of mind fuckery taking place here. He talks about Malay inheriting money, and then what he does with it is he goes to somewhere and he paints, right? Now, I think what he's trying to say is we are going to inherit, but specifically Theo's going to inherit. And because Malay did this, that I should be allowed to go and paint peasants, and I would be right to do that. Can you see that there's a bit of manipulation going on here? I mean, he's talking about the same thing, the good fortune to inherit, right? Then he says others did the same. Paul Dubois, who spent his whole patrimony on models and was for a time quite melancholy because of money worries. Doesn't it feel like he's exerting a bit of kind of psychological coercion and saying to Theo, if we inherit or if you inherit, it wouldn't be wrong if I spent money on models. That's where his mind space is. You kind of get the feeling in the aftermath to his father's death, Vincent van Gogh is thinking about sex. He's thinking about getting models into his own space. Well, what is he going to do with it, right? Doesn't it kind of feel like that? Anyway, then he says, but I haven't any legacy to expect, and I cannot do as I should like. But pardon me when I say that, if Serre and you, and very rightly too, want to see other qualities in my figures, I shall have to spend more on my models. So in other words, what he's saying there is, I'm not really going to inherit, and I'm happy not to inherit. He doesn't say it in so many words, and maybe he says it a bit later, but he's basically saying, you are going to inherit, and maybe it'll be okay if the money you send me I spend on models. Can you see he's kind of brokering that discussion? Anyway, he says, I do not know how people manage to fill the salon with yards and yards of canvas. Well, among those cottages, there are a few that I've painted in a much brighter tone. And then he talks a little bit more about that and the gloomy effects. And then he says, what I shall do now, if the month turns out a little better than you expected, is to send you the 4 pictures. Otherwise, I shan't have the money to send them. But in that case, I will send them as soon as I have the money for the next month. But I hope you will bring those figure studies back when you come, for I am going to add others which I need for painting. So really all of this letter is about is money, inheritance, and painting peasants kind of as models, right? You get that? That's the kind of timber of this letter. At this point, he's 32 years old, right? So let's go on to the next letter. I think there are 4 in March, in July. Well, this is a terrible painting. It doesn't really even look genuine. That's pretty terrible, isn't it? I wouldn't want that in my house. Okay, so he says, on to the next letter. He says, Dear Thea, I wish the 4 canvases I wrote to you about had gone. If I keep them here for much longer, I might paint them over again. And I think it's better if you get them just as they come off the heath. Now, that is no idle threat. I'm not quite sure if he means through that. I don't know if he means I might paint over the painting. I think that is what he means. What do you guys think? I suppose you could say what he's saying could mean I might paint them again. I might try painting the same thing again on a different canvas. But I take that to mean if I don't send this to you, I'm going to paint over that painting, a different painting. And that is something that he did, right? He did that because he didn't have enough money for art supplies. Yeah, it is a bit of a eyesore, definitely. It doesn't really even look genuine. It looks garish, doesn't it? Yeah, so I agree with you guys. I think it is painting over them or reusing them. Yeah. So that's not an idle threat. So sitting on this side of time, you can kind of imagine us going, Theo, please, for goodness sake, send him the money. Because, it's if he starts doing that, it's one Van Gogh lost, another Van Gogh lost. Although they're quite terrible, it's nevertheless, one Van Gogh lost. So anyway, he goes on to say, the reason I haven't sent them is that I don't want to send them to you carriage forward at a time when you say that you yourself might be short of cash. I think carriage forward means something like cash on delivery, that Theo will have to pay. It's like reverse charges, right? That's what I think that means. Then he says, but I cannot afford the carriage myself. He says, I've never seen a little house in which Malay lived, but I imagine that those 4 little human nests, right, that's how he refers to them, are of the same sort. One is the residence of a gentleman popularly known as the mourning peasant. The other is inhabited by a worthy soul who, when I went there, was up to nothing more mysterious than digging her potato clamp, but who must be capable of practicing witchcraft. She goes by the name of Witch's Head anyway. So he talks about 4 little human nests. That's another way of just referring to houses. But I think it's a good opportunity to just quickly show you a couple more of those weaver's nests. Yeah, Stephanie did send me a couple of short video clips from a Van Gogh immersive experience. I don't know if you want to resend them to me. And I don't know if you want to join me, not on this live, but on a live in the future where we maybe talk about it. I just want to show you a couple of weaver's nests while we're just on the topic. So in this image, you can actually see that there are 3 nests, right? There are 3 weaver's nests at the same time. And I think there's even a 4th that he was busy working on. But anyway, as you can see, there are 3 weaver's nests. This nest is a nest that is both a sparrow's nest on this side and a finch's nest on that side. I'm going to show you the finch in a moment. So look at that, just what a work of art that is, right? Do you imagine that got totally pulled to pieces? What is not good enough about that? Look how perfectly constructed that is. What was wrong with that? There he is with a beautiful light sort of framing his yellow feathers. This was earlier in the spring. You can see the buds just coming out. That's quite a nice picture of the early sunlight glinting on his beak. And that is the bird in that big nest. It's a finch. So it's a nest that is shared by this bird and a sparrow on the other side. They're kind of neighbors. It's quite amazing that such small birds build such big nests, right? Anyway, there he is, hard at work again. So anyway, let's get back to that. We'll look at some other images a little bit later on. Stephanie asked, were the dancing weavers two males or male and female? No, they were two males. The males are bright yellow and the females are sort of a drab kind of, there's not really any yellow. It's like a drab green, like a dull green. Let me see if I can bring that up quickly while we on the topic. Is it going to not let me play this? Okay, well, what if I do that? Clever, hey? So those are two males and they're sort of sparring. If you watch the original clip, you can actually hear the sound they make. It's sort of like a whirring kind of sound. Anyway, so that's the weaver in action. It's unfortunately not, I do zoom in, it's not terribly good quality. But there you go. Okay, let's move back to our subject matter. So he talks about, you'll remember that Guigou's book tells us how it came about that 17 of Delacroix's pictures were turned down all at the same time. That shows, to me at least, that he and others of that period were faced with connoisseurs and non-connoisseurs alike. I feel a bit like him in terms of true crime. You've got people that just don't value your work, right? Anyway, it says, who neither understood them nor wanted to buy anything by them, but that they who are rightly called les valants, the brave in the book, didn't talk of fighting, losing battle, but went on painting. Oh my God, Vincent it seems like he's saying, keep on working, don't stop, don't give up. Then he says, what I wanted to say again is that if we take that story about Delacroix as our starting point, we still have a lot of painting to do. I find myself faced with the necessity of being the most disagreeable of people. Okay. In other words, of having to ask for money. He doesn't like that. And to his credit, he doesn't like that. He says, and since I don't think that sales will pick up in the next few days, actually the next few years, the situation seems rather dire. But I put it to you, isn't it better for both of us, our players too, to work hard no matter what problems that may entail, than to sit around philosophizing at a time like this? That is a sort of indirect reference to where they are in terms of their father. That is a kind of indirect reference to that, right? I can't tell the future, Theo, but I do know the eternal law that all things change. Think back 10 years and things were different, the circumstances, the mood of the people, in short, everything. And 10 years hence, much is bound to have changed again. Well, that's quite an interesting statement that he makes. It's quite interesting to think about that in terms of his life, because we know the answer to that. We know where he was 10 years later, and the answer is, well, 5 years later, he wasn't even alive, right? So obviously, he thought he would be alive at least 10 years later. The other thing that's interesting is to think about our own lives. Think about 10 years ago. Think about where social media was 10 years ago. Think about, if I go back 10 years, none of my books actually existed. I'm talking about the true crime books. I had written manuscripts that sort of weren't published and hadn't seen the light of day. But if I go back 10 years, so to 2012, the Oscar trial hadn't even happened. All of that's not even there. So there's been phenomenal change, definitely in my life and in what I've produced, and in, there was not even the blink of the YouTube channel, and now there's that. There wasn't even a blink of Patreon, now there's that. There wasn't even the blink of me living where I'm living, and lots of other things. And I'm sure in your lives, if you think back 10 years, the pace of change is actually quite incredible. And then you think, where could you be 10 years from now, right? Where could my channel be 10 years from now? But also, where could I be? Where could my health be? Where could yours be, right? Where do you want it to be? What should one do with, here I am, and I know what happened 10 years ago, and what about the next 10 years? Also, think about Van Gogh, the 10 years preceding this point, and his future. Well, his future wasn't going to be terribly good. Art good, but he was going to die not a terribly nice death 5 years from this point. He's going to lose his ear 3 years from this point. And I wonder if you could have beamed yourself into his time and his space right now at this moment. While he's writing this letter, you could have beamed yourself there and said, hey, Vincent, I'm from the future and I can prove it. This is what you're about to write, and this is what happened to you, and I know this. And he believed you, and he said, Vincent, you're going to be an incredibly famous artist, one of the most famous in the world. I can prove it to you. Like, so many years from now, people are going to be throwing soup on your work because they know it's so popular and it'll become like world news, right? But you're going to suffer for your art. You're going to lose your ear. You're going to go to an asylum. You're going to die a horrible death. Is it worth it? Do you want to continue this journey? Well, I wonder what he would say. Sometimes I think he would say, no, I would rather have a nice-ish life than a legacy post-mortem. Other times I think he might say, cool, okay, no, I don't mind suffering. Okay, cool, so I'm going to be world famous. Okay, cool, thanks for letting me know. Off you go. Sorry, I don't really have time for this. Do you mind if I get back to my art? It just makes one wonder what he would say, also what he should say. And then what would you do in that situation? If you were Vincent van Gogh, I had a conversation with my father about this, where I said, you know what, if someone told me that I'm going to be really incredibly famous after I die, should I just carry on writing books? And I said, my answer is, I don't care how famous I'm supposed to be. If not writing books is going to be my ticket to avoiding death, thanks, I'd rather avoid death. But I said, there is a little caveat to that. If I knew that my books were going to save lives and change lives and be a big part of, like in A Beautiful Mind, the game theory from John Nash, if that was actually going to change society, right? Fundamentally change society. If I could be convinced of that, I might say, okay, that's worth something, and maybe that's worth giving up my life for. If that's going to have such an edifying impact on society, well, I'm prepared to have that be the case. But no. If I'm just going to be well known, it's not really going to change lives really. I'd rather you can get rid of all that. Thanks. I'd rather stay alive. I don't know what you guys think about that, because life is precious. I don't know about you. My life is precious. Isn't your life precious? Is art more precious than life? Which is the subject of this. Is life more precious, or isn't life more precious than art? Isn't life more precious than art? Are they right? Are these activists right? Is life more precious than art? Is art more precious than life? Is some art more precious than life? Is any art more precious than life? Yeah, there was a time I was pretty shy. I am actually still shy. Actually, I don't like Van Gogh is a little bit different, but I don't sort of feel like, oh, I can't wait to be on YouTube. I actually still feel I'd rather do a synced video. I'd rather not show myself. But I guess that is true. A lot can be said for learning, right? For when you do things often enough, you evolve, and one's got to, I think, account for that. One's got to, what's the word? One's got to make room for that in your calculus. That between A and B, you are going to develop as a human being. You're going to become more effective and efficient, hopefully, at certain things. And that's going to lead to other things, right? Stephanie says, I must have missed this article. Stephanie, I'll put it in chat. It makes me think, Stephanie, where have you been? But I think the answer is you've been with your family, and you've also been ill. Susanna says, life is much more precious. Deborah says, you can't have the one with the other. The other thing to think about is, didn't Van Gogh kind of give up his life for his art? I mean, doesn't it feel like that? Doesn't it feel like he virtually didn't sell any of his art? Doesn't it feel like that he felt art is more important than life? I mean, isn't that part of what this painting is trying to say? That's what he believes in, a kind of creative morality, living in a creative way, that morality is worth dying for. Think about the whole Pilgrim's Progress and the plight of the peasant. He seems to see suffering, which is a kind of living death, as an honorable way to live, and that is how he ended up living. So it does seem that he struggled and suffered in service to art, and I think that is something that we really love and respect him for, because there's so few people who would do that genuinely, right? Yeah, I think that's a true statement. So anyway, then he says, but what one does remains. and one does not easily regret having done it. Doesn't it feel like exactly what we're talking about? He's speaking to us on that. He's addressing that question. He's answering that question. Where he's almost saying, even though I didn't really have success in my life as an artist, it was worth it. That journey was worth it. I know that I found truth in the landscape, in the color, in my journey, and that's good enough. And that truth has echoed through decades. That electric, vibrating, um, sort of visceral energy, that sort of force field, has reached across time and kind of communicated to us that there's another way of looking at the world, that the world is kind of vibrating with possibility, with color, with a kind of reality that we don't see, right? Anyway, he says, the more active one is, the better, and I would sooner have a failure than sit idle and do nothing. Whether or not Portier is the right man to do something with my work, we need him now at any rate. And this is what I have in mind. So this is his plan. He says, after, say, a year's work, we shall have put together more than we have now. And I know for sure that my work will fare better the more I can add to it. People who show some liking for it now, who speak of it as he does and show it from time to time, are useful. Because if I work for, let's say, another year and they're able to add a few more things to their collection, that will speak for itself, even if the collectors themselves have nothing to say at all. So indirectly, can you see how he is conscious of the passage of time? So again, he's not addressing his father's death. He's not saying, he's not mentioning directly the reality that their father has died. But you can see that indirectly he is. He's talking about 10 years ago and 10 years into the future. He's talking about wrenching change, how things can change radically. Well, somebody close to you dying is how change can happen suddenly, and you can go on a different road. Um, he also is talking now about a year's work. He's thinking into the future. How am I going to be working a year from now? All of that is based on this idea that something can proceed or progress to a certain point, and then it can stop. Someone can live with you and then no longer be there, and then you go in a different direction. Their lives have stopped and your life continues, and maybe at that point it goes into a different direction. Maybe it even accelerates, right? Can you see how, in a way, he is acknowledging that through his psychology, right? So he goes on to say, people show some liking for it now, who speak of it as he does, and show it from time to time, are useful. Because if I work for let's say another year and they're able to add a few more things to their collection, that will speak for itself. If you happen to see Portier, tell him that, far from giving up, I intend sending him much more. You too must go on showing my work if you meet people. It won't be all that long before I have more important things to show. You yourself will have seen, and it is something that pleases me enormously, that one man shows, or shows by just a few who belong together, are becoming increasingly popular. So it's quite interesting. He thinks of himself as a one-man show. I'm sure that in the art world, this is more avenir, a future, than other ventures. It's a good thing people are beginning to realize that Bouguereau or Bouguereau does not do well next to Jacques, or a figure by Bale or Lermite next to Shelford or Cook. By the way, cook is a Dutch word for cake, so the literal translation for that is cake. Scatter Raffaelli's drawings about, and judge for yourself if it's still possible to get a good idea of that singular artist. Raffaele, is different from Regami, but I think, or Regame, but I think he has just as much personality. I wouldn't mind just being able to pronounce all these artists' names right. Like, there are so many, and it's difficult to know how to, right? Karina says, Vincent's determination never ceases to amaze me. His focus, just incredible. He is very focused. So if you wanted to ask, how do you become a world famous artist? Well, by focusing, having incredible focus, having an incredible work ethic, and having a kind of self-belief that defies kind of reality, that defies society, that defies everyone, but also that defines itself, right? So he goes on to say, supposing you had these 4 canvases and a few smaller studies of cottages, someone who saw nothing else of mine would be bound to think that I painted nothing but cottages, and likewise with a series of heads. But peasant life involves so many different things that when Malay speaks of travailler comme plusieurs nègres, working like a bunch of slaves, this is truly what is to be done if one wants to assemble a body of work. One may laugh at Courbet's saying, painting angels, who has ever seen angels? But to that I should like to add justice to the harem. Who has ever seen justice in the harem? Anyway, carries on, talks about bullfights. He says, what is the use of it all and what are they doing it for? Within a few years, most of it looks dull and dreary and more boring. But still, perhaps they are well painted. They could be that. I always find it incredible that we are reading letters that are, you know, about 150 years old, and it reads so it feels so contemporary, right? It feels fresh. It feels like he wrote this yesterday. He says, nowadays when connoisseurs stand in front of a painting like the one by Benjamin Constant, or like some reception given by some cardinal, I don't know, by I don't know which Spaniard, it's the custom to say with a meaningful air something about clever technique. But as soon as those same connoisseurs are confronted by a subject from peasant life or a drawing by, say, Raffaele, they criticize the technique with the same knowing air. Doesn't that feel a little bit like true crime? That true crime thinks they're so clever and they're so wise, and yet when they deal with a relatively simple subject or kind of a humble, not sophisticated subject, they bring the same knowing air. It just doesn't really work because they don't really know, they don't really have that humility, I think, to deal with a certain kind of simple case where you've got to get into the shoes of your of your victim. And that is, I think, what makes I think that is what makes missing children and missing teenagers and missing young people cases quite difficult, because it's difficult for older people to get into the right psychology. That's been my experience. Deborah says, you do a great job. Please don't worry. I understand and follow along while you narrate. Okay, let's get back to Van Gogh. You may think I'm wrong to comment on this, but I'm so stuck by the fact that all these exotic pictures were painted in the studio. Just try going outside and painting things on the spot. So in this sense, he's quite a realist. He likes to not sit in a studio. He likes to do what Terry did, go out into the field and illustrate instead of investigate, illustrate directly in plein air, in person. He says all sorts of things happened then. I had to pick off a good 100 or more flies from the 4 canvases you're about to receive. Wow, isn't that a lovely sort of reality bite in a way, like a little glimpse of his reality, that he had to pick off 100 flies while he was outdoors painting. And this is obviously in summer, it's July in the Netherlands. Not to mention dust and sand, not to mention the fact that if one carries them through heath and hedgerows for a couple of hours, a branch or two is likely to scratch them. So this kind of gives you that really genuine, that really authentic sense of the artist mucking about, having to deal with flies and dirt and branches. And, he's kind of like in that amateur phase where he's got to deal with the small stumbling blocks, but at the same time hold on to that self-belief. A lot of times it's the small little things that kind of bug you and excuse the pun, and sort of eat at you and gnaw at you. And those are the things you kind of got to push aside and say, yeah, well, I'm working on something big here. I'm not going to let these little things bother me. Like 100 flies. Anyway, then he says, not to mention the fact that when one arrives on the heath, one feels tired and hot after a couple of hours walk in this weather. So that's the other thing. He arrives at the spot that he's going to paint, and his shirt is soaked through with perspiration, and he's feeling kind of uncomfortable. That's what he's going through. He's got to sublimate all of that stuff. He's got to transcend all of those discomforts in order to hold true to his vision, right? I do need a lozenge. Anyway, it goes on to say, not to mention the fact that the figures don't stand still like professional models, and that the effects one wants to capture change as the day wears on. I don't know how it was, I don't know how it is with you, but as far as I'm concerned, the more I work at it, the more absorbed I get in peasant life, and the less I care for the Cabanel-like things, among which I would include Jacquet and the present-day Benjamin Constant, or the highly praised but inexpressibly hopelessly dry technique of the Italians and Spaniards. Okay, I'm going to skip the next paragraph. He says Zola. Now, bear in mind, Zola is a reference to that book, right? That's by Emile Zola. That's in that portrait. So he says, Zola, who otherwise, in my opinion, makes some colossal blunders when he judges pictures. That's quite ironic, that this writer that he really respects doesn't know much about art, and yet he puts this writer in his art. Quite an irony. He talks about he makes colossal blunders when he judges pictures, but he says something beautiful about art in general. In Mezanes, he says, in the picture, the work of art I look for, I love the man, the artist. That's quite an incredible reverse psychology. He's saying, when I look at a picture, I fall in love with the artist, not I fall in love with the art. And that is really something that Van Gogh himself actually achieved. So many people love his art, love the artist, and as a result, love his art. I don't think it's the other way around. I don't think it's that they love his art, so they love the artist. I think it's that they love the artist, and so they love his art. Some of it is cyclical. They love the art, or they like the art, they love the artist, and then they love the art even more. But to be honest, from my perspective, if I'm really being honest with you, I like his art because I like the artist. I respect his art because I respect the artist, but I've got to say a lot of his art I don't really like. And I'm quite honest about that. There is to me a handful of his paintings, literally one or two handfuls, that I really, really do like, which is why I've got them up in my bedroom. I really like Wheatfield with Crows, not because it's got a dark aspect to it. And think about that whole thing and what you talk about in true crime. everyone sees dark suicide. I see a beautiful painting in a wheat field that I've actually visited, where there are actually crows. I see it for what I think it is. Um, I love his painting of Auvers with the train going across. I love that painting, but I think it's because I know what the artist felt and saw, because I saw it myself and heard it myself. I heard the train going across the valley, and it was this magical sound and experience. Sounded like a storm. And I think he said the same thing. I also love Starry Night. I also love the Red Vineyard, um, and a handful of other paintings. Um, but I think a big reason for that is that I really respect the journey that he was so resilient, and he believed in himself, and he didn't really feel that he needed, although I'm sure that he did, but he didn't really feel that he needed society's approval or society's the nod of their head. It was enough that he believed in himself, and I think all of us find a lot to respect and admire in that. Um, at the moment, I feel invalidated by competitors and by numbers. And Van Gogh reminds you that you can have none of that. You can have absolutely nothing. No money, no numbers, no one believing in you. It's just okay if you believe in yourself, right? It's a reminder for that. Karina says, I love the irises. Yeah, you do. That's interesting. Yvonne says, I love Vincent more than his art too. I wonder what he would say about that. I think he would take that as a backhanded compliment. Okay. So it's really interesting that he does say here, and you know, if Vincent didn't like you saying that, if Vincent was sitting here and he said, ek hou nie daarvan dat jy nie van my kunswerk hou nie, and that's Afrikaans, that should sound slightly different. But if he said, if you said, Vincent, you know, you said, and you could say it in Dutch, something like, in die skilderwerk, jy het gesê, jy kyk vir die liefde van die man, die kunstenaar, right? You said that. And you said, well, that is exactly what we found. We found that we loved you, the artist, more than the art. And that wasn't that what you wanted? Well, you got what you wanted. He would probably snort with laughter. Anyway, he says, there you have it. I think that's absolutely true. I ask you, what kind of man, what kind of visionary or thinker, observer, what kind of human character is there behind certain canvases extolled for their technique? Often no kind at all. As you know, but a Raffaelli is somebody, a Lermite is somebody, and obviously a Van Gogh is somebody. And with many pictures by almost unknown people, one has the feeling that they were made with a will, with feeling, with passion, with love. Isn't that an incredible statement? Because that is exactly what you see in Van Gogh's art. You see that feeling, you see that passion. You get a feeling, you get the sense that he really wanted to translate the feeling of life, the rush of life onto the canvas, right? That was what Simon Sharma also said in the introduction to his series. Remember, I played it quite often. The rush of life. You know, he's feeling the rush of life. He was transposing the rush of life onto the canvas, right? So he goes on to say, the technique of a painting from peasant life, from the heart of urban workers, introduces problems quite other than those of the smooth painting and portrayal of actions of a Jacquet or Benjamin Constant, namely living in cottages day in and day out, being out in the fields just like the peasants, in the heat of the summer, of the sun in summer, enduring snow. Okay, I'm just going to quickly turn off my phone. Just give me a second. Okay, I actually think it's Stephanie who is sending through some videos, so I think I can maybe bring that up. Timmy, I'd like to put you on my lap, but your bum is a bit dirty. Okay, I hope it's gonna let me open this. Oh, there we go. That's something that Stephanie recorded, I guess. Okay, can you guys hear the sound? I would imagine that you can't, so I'm gonna try and make sure that you can. Yeah, that is the immersive exhibit. Share screen with audio. Okay. Okay, so that's one of them. I think we'll play two now and one a little bit later. So let's bring up the next one. Wow.
What do you think, Steph? I'm doing a video.
That is pretty cool. That is definitely pretty cool.
All right, bye.
It's almost like the Weaver bird is part of that display. Like if I go out the picture and play it again, it's almost like he belongs in that display.
What do you think, Steph? I'm doing a video.
That's so cool.
All right, bye.
Okay, well, we might as well go through all three videos while we're here. Let's go to thanks so much for sharing this with us, Stephanie. Very cool, especially that second one. I don't know if we can do better than that second one. As good as this is, and as grateful as we are for sharing, I still think the Loving Vincent animation is incredible. I don't know what you think, Stephanie. Here comes the sun. Yeah. So I don't know what you think, Stephanie. Does this match that? I mean, it's obviously different if you literally are immersed in that. Does this when you watch that? How do I do this? when you watch that Loving Vincent, like if you had to choose, which one would you say you prefer? Or is it something you can't prefer? Oh, it doesn't match. So that says, I plow on my canvas as they do in their fields. What do you mean it doesn't match? Do you mean the immersive experience? Oh, yeah. That's kind of my experience looking at this, that this is quite good, but the obviously on a scale like this, it's slightly different, but the Loving Vincent's absolutely incredible. Yeah. Loving Vincent is really absolutely incredible. Okay, well, thanks again, Stephanie, for sharing that. That was a unexpected bonus, definitely. Okay, so I really like the footage that your husband took, and he's got a nice little chuckle in there. Okay, so he says, talking about technique, he says, am I really so wrong to object to the criticisms of those experts who more than ever before bandy this so often irrelevant word technique? So, if you think about that and you think about the reality is that he's kind of a nobody. He's not an established artist. He's not proved himself. He has studied art. He is educated. His brother's also educated. But you can kind of understand the art establishment and other artists who prove their worth sneering at him, right? But you can also equally see that he's got a leg to stand on, that he's not a slouch. He's not an idiot. He knows what he's talking about. He's also kind of a revolutionary. He's creating art history. He's actually about to break totally away. Like right now, he's still within a particular art tradition, right? But he is about to kind of create a totally new artism, which is expressionism. And so all of this bitching and moaning about technique is coming out of a place of someone who does actually know what he's talking about, does actually have a leg to stand on. I kind of feel a bit like that in true crime, that actually I'm not a slouch. Actually, and you guys will know that, actually I have quite a good education, but I don't have like a doctorate or a certain title. I don't have some kind of shining, glittering YouTube channel that shows me in the best possible light. And so people base what they see on that kind of on the optics, on the superficial, but I think they can't see a lot deeper than that. And the same applied with Vincent van Gogh, was that he was trying to do something special in quite a deep way, in quite a fantastic way, with color and with his own technique, and in a totally original way. And that does mean something. When someone creates something new, that takes courage and fortitude and force of character, and he had all of those things. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, it's actually a beautiful clip. I mean, it's a nice moment. Okay, so he goes on to say, Moorish models are readily available against payment in Paris, but anyone who, like Raffaelli, paints the rag pickers of Paris in their own quarter has greater problems, and his work is more serious. Nothing seems simpler than painting peasants or rag pickers and other workers, but there are no subjection paintings as difficult as those everyday figures. He says, every city of any importance has an academy with a choice of models for historical Arabic Louis what is that, Louis XIV. In a nutshell, every sort of figure, provided they do not exist in reality. When I send you the Serre, a few studies of diggers or peasant women weeding, gleaning corn, as the first of a whole series on all kinds of work in the fields, your Serre may discover flaws in them, which it will be helpful to me to know about, and which I shall in all probability acknowledge. How long is this letter? Quite long. Wow, it's still going on. So I saw the word nude somewhere here, stood out to me. I can put it more succinctly: a nude by Cabanel, a lady by Jacquet, and a peasant woman will always convey the limbs and the structure of the body in the same way, sometimes charming, accurate in proportion and anatomical detail. So he's really just talking art. He's talking about the old Dutch masters paint the action for the action's sake. He says, do I make myself clear? He says, I've been plodding away the last few days at a woman whom I saw putting carrots in the snow last winter. So all of it really is about art and about art. He talks about, I know that it is disagreeable of one to ask for money at awkward moments, but my excuse is that painting what appear to be the most commonplace things is sometimes the most difficult and expensive. So he comes back to that. He says, you wrote not long ago that Serre had spoken to you with conviction about certain faults in the structure of the figures in the Potato Eaters. But you will have seen from my answer that I found fault on that score myself as well. So there is actually kind of, sorry, I didn't realize it's so small. There is kind of acknowledging that there are flaws with the Potato Eaters. So he's taken great exception, he's taken really personally what Van Rappard has said, but now he is actually saying, you know what, there were some flaws in the figures, and there definitely were. He doesn't really get the hands right, doesn't really get the nose right. It's kind of clumsy. Some of it is promising, but it's not really the triumph that he hoped for. He says, you will have seen from my answer that I found fault on that score myself, though I did point out that this was my impression after I've seen the cottage many evenings in the dim lamplight, after I'd painted 40 heads, from which follows that I set out from a different point of view. So it's almost like he's saying, at night in these shadows, it does come across somewhat distorted, and I was trying to capture that different point of view. Then he says, he's talking about trying to imbue his art with character, and he certainly succeeds with that. He goes on to emphasize this idea of there must be character. He talks about cutting down on the expenses for models. He says that's a fairly heavy burden. To show the peasant figure in action. He again refers to the modern nude. You get the idea that he's kind of got this on his mind. He talks again about peasants and workers are not nudes, nor does one need to imagine them in the nude. It's almost like he's saying, don't worry, I'm not going to paint nudes to his brother. Anyway, then he says, I do want to make plain how much importance I attach to the figure issue. Yeah, you've said it over and over again, Vincent. I think we get the message. Anyway, so let's go on to the next letter. I at least want to get through July. Let's say, is there another letter in July? So one more letter, then we're in July. As far as I know, the painting of his father happens in September. It could be October. Let's just see where that is. So he first paints this painting, the old church tower, which I think is already touching on that whole theme, the church. What's going on now? That's already touching on his father via the church, right? I just want to see where he paints the. There's another letter to Van Rappard. So now we are in August, late August. September paints those. There's a nest, right? We've kind of touched on that a little bit. And then I'm just trying to find the one of his father. Is it October? I think it is October. There it is, October. So I think we're gonna complete our. Just been a very long night for me. We're gonna complete our journey now with July, and then we'll try and do August, September, and October, those 3 months in one episode, which I think we can do. There's not that many. We'll just kind of, move through it. So let's do the last letter now, and then we'll move on to, that'll be the end of episode 31. Then we'll move on to some more of my photos, and then we'll very quickly look at the tomato soup thing. Anyway, so it's been quite a while that he's spoken to Van Rappard, and obviously I think this is a response to what Van Rappard says. So he says, the reason it is necessary to put a stop to these bickerings is, first of all, that they begin to bear too close a resemblance to the dispute between a certain pair of devout preachers who argued with so much ferocity over a difference of opinion concerning the exact geographical location of the road to salvation, that at the very same moment and with the very same gesture, they threw their respective wigs into each other's faces. I often get the sense that Van Gogh would have made a fantastic lawyer, because he's very good at arguing certain points, but in a very clever way. Sometimes he can argue for his own defense in an offensive way, but without being that offensive. I don't know if you guys have noticed that. He would have made a really good author, and a very good lawyer, and I think also quite a good journalist. Then he says, indeed, the wigs would be appropriate, and how, with the best will in the world, could we go on, seeing that we just arrived at a critical point, and neither you nor I possess the indispensable missile in question. I'm therefore at my wit's end. I deeply regret that we started something that we are unable to bring to the above-mentioned triumphant end. So I kind of get the sense that he put a lot of pressure on Van Rappard, and Van Rappard was basically F you. Van Rappard didn't take kindly to being nudged or coerced or forced, and Van Gogh demanded an apology, and to his credit, he actually walked that back and said, I'm sorry, I'm at wit's end. And you kind of get the sense that, to his credit, he was able to kind of acknowledge that that some of what Van Rappard said had merit, meaning that there were flaws in the figures, that wasn't quite the masterpiece that he felt that it was, and that Van Rappard had a point, right? So he goes on to say, our dispute has a decidedly ridiculous side, in my opinion, and it is bound to get more and more so, for which reason I won't go into the subject any further. It is too absurd. Be sensible and put a stop to it on your part too. All the thoughts that occur to one's mind don't come straight from one's conscience Whether your conscience dictated your letters to you, question mark. Whether it was your duty to write them, question mark. What drivel is this? Laugh it off. So he can be quite pushy, right? He says, since you thought it was your duty, since you thought your conscience urged you to do it, I will let the whole business with all its extra adornments go. So be finished. The question remains as to whether you are thinking of coming here to do a number of studies. So he's kind of like saying, like, in what's going on in his mind is he's thinking, I would like Van Rappard to come here. Oh, well, the problem is we're arguing. Okay, well, let's just get rid of the argument. Oh, are you still coming here? So you can see he's a little bit of a sly fellow, a little bit of a manipulative fellow, isn't he? Then he says, then I shall see to it that you can stay at my mother's house as usual. With greetings, Vincent. Shall we read just this last letter from the 3rd of August? No, it's too long, way too long. Okay, so we'll continue with August in the Van Gogh letters 32. And now I'm going to take you guys through some additional photos of the weaver. I'll kind of show you guys some photos that I haven't already shown you. Okay. So he's kind of doing acrobatics. What he's doing right is he's creating that hammock right from scratch. He's got to create that hammock on which he can rest so that he doesn't have to hang the way that he's hanging there, right? So there's another nest. Think about all the work that went into that nest, right? That's one nest. He made 7 of those. Think how much work and effort and time, stripping all those leaves, weaving them in. You know, that's not one day's work. That's probably about 4 days' work, 3-4 days' work. That's working all day for about 4 or 5 days. And then all of it torn to pieces. And then doing that 7 times. It's hard work. It's definitely very hard work. And you kind of got to be a bit of a gymnast. You see how the beginning is so difficult. Getting started is quite difficult. That's quite a good photo because I managed to capture the eye and this sort of tiny detail. That makes it quite a good photo. He's even got quite a sort of geographic neck. I mean, look at that. Quite a long neck. Deborah says, hi guys, need to go. I'm going to watch Loving Vincent again. Enjoy it. Enjoy it. It's very good. So there's like the beginning of it, right? Just a different perspective on these nests. Look how perfect that is. You kind of feel like asking what was wrong with these nests? You know, like to the female that disapproved, what was wrong with these nests? What was wrong with these nests? I managed here to get a photo where you can actually kind of see into the nest. All the work that went into this and then torn down, right? And I've got to say, I kind of feel the same. I feel like, certainly in the Kylie Rodney case, I worked really hard, and yet I feel like my work gets torn down by people who should know better. It feels like I don't really have that much to show for it, certainly more than this weaver does, but it's the same feeling of I also worked really, really hard and didn't really get any. I got some credit from you guys, but I didn't really get credit from the true crime community, really, you know? That's exactly what it feels like. It's frustrating. It's a feeling of defeat. It makes you angry. It makes you feel like you did so much, and what do you have to show for it? So, when I'm in my garden and I look up and there are no nests, I know what that bird did. I know how hard it worked. I know those nests were there, but they're all gone. That sort of feeling of emptiness, that feeling of injustice, that feeling of unfairness, that feeling of it's not right, kind of resonates with me. But it also shows that shit happens, that you work really hard. You don't always get what you deserve. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And I mean, isn't that the story of Van Gogh? He didn't get what he deserved. He worked shit hard. He deserved success, but he didn't get it. But that's life. I do think you've got to try and make the effort to say, I'm not getting success, and respond appropriately. Either stop working or do something else, or deal with your critics in a way that you do get the credit or the respect you deserve. And do you see the way that Van Gogh dealt with Van Rappard? He fought with him, but then he kind of reconciled with him. You must pick your battles, I guess. But it's also important to stand up for yourself, right? Thanks, Susanna. That's kind of you to say. So none of these nests exist anymore. There is in mid construction. I think these are also really nice photos, just colorful. He's in full weave mode, right? It's not a bad picture. And there's that same one again. Okay. Okay, anyway, so there's a few final things I want to address, which is, for example, this article, Just Stop Oil. I just want to touch on it quickly and highlight a couple of things that I think are important to highlight. So I think what I'm going to say is the following, and I want your, yeah, keep weaving. I want your input on this. Thanks a lot, Stephanie. Appreciate that. remember I said the past is precious. What I want to address here is when you look at these individuals, when you just look at them, we know what their message was, which is that climate change matters, and I agree with the message. But I don't know if I agree with throwing tomato soup on a painting. I agree that life is more important than art. But the problem I've got with this is the following: is I don't really feel like I can take these individuals seriously, and I'll show you why. And I just want to know whether you guys feel the same way, whether you agree. This is a picture of one of the protesters getting arrested. They're the cans of soup, right? And what I'm trying to get at, I'm going to show you a few more images. What I'm trying to get at is this activist genuine? Is this activist sincere? Is the character of this activist, is she a true champion for the climate or something else? Now, have a look at these other images. So can you see she's got sort of reddish hair, right? Well, this is her as well. Now, when you see that picture, does that change your impression of her? Now, I'm going to say it does for me. I see someone that I don't know if you can take seriously. I see someone that seems like a bit of an attention seeker. In other words, I'm not doing this because I care that much about the subject. I'm doing this because I want to get attention. In other words, it's a little bit like I said about true crime earlier. It's not so much about the argument, it's about me being the star of the argument, right? Don't you get that impression? And you might say, yeah, well, that was a fancy dress party. That was a 1 in a million photo. Well, there's this one as well. Don't you get a sense that this is an attention seeker? Yeah. It's an attention seeker. It's not someone who genuinely, sincerely gives a crap about what she's doing. She just wants to be on the star. She just wants to be in the headlines. And isn't that what's wrong with social media right now? It's style without substance. It's attention seeking without actually having anything to fucking say, right? Let's look at some of these other images. Sorry, it's that one again. So what I'm trying to say is I feel like I can't take that seriously. I feel like I can't take that seriously because you're not doing it because you genuinely care. You care about yourself. You care about it, getting attention. Maybe you do care about the climate, but that's sort of a byproduct of what you really care about, which is yourself, right? Yeah. And so the whole message is actually wasted because you can't actually take this person seriously. And then you start to see the true sort of scenario where you've got a very, very valuable painting and you've got this vacuous person attacking it, getting attention that they really don't deserve. And then you actually see what's really going on is someone is cheating to get attention. They're not doing the hard work. They're not doing what everyone else does to make an argument. They're cheating. In other words, they acknowledge, they admit that they can't make an argument that's worth otherwise paying attention to. In other words, it's using the same idea of tabloid sensationalism to make an argument, otherwise no one would pay attention to you, right? It's the argument I've been making all along in true crime, is make a proper argument, not using all sorts of little tricks and gimmicks and flash and all that kind of thing. Why do you need that sort of support? Well, maybe because you can't actually make a proper argument. Maybe because you actually know deep inside, privately, that you don't actually have the skills, the education, the intelligence. So what do? You cheat your way to making an argument. And then you feel threatened by someone who can make an argument, and you try and actually sanction them, right? Doesn't that feel like what I'm saying is valid? Doesn't that feel? It's not like I'm not being emotional where I'm saying that I'm being reasonable. It's true, right? Yeah. And what I also don't like is it's kind of bullying your way into people's attention space when you don't even deserve it. You don't deserve to be listened to, right? So that's the first thing I wanted to mention. And I also wanted to say, you complain about damaging humanity by damaging humanity, by damaging culture. In other words, your argument is mutually destructive. You say to humanity, stop damaging humanity, but you are damaging the legacy of humanity at the same time. It shows that you are a bit of a not sensible person. And I wonder whether, that's marijuana, isn't it? Isn't this someone who takes recreational substances, right? I'm not saying if you smoke a joint, no one should take you seriously, but if you smoke a lot of joints and that's part of your identity, how serious are you when you're sober about the real world, right? So it's a little bit of true crime analysis of a crime against Van Gogh. So I want to show you this article. So it basically says here, Just Stop Oil's Van Gogh soup stunt sparks criticism of an alienating strategy. I'll put a link to that in chat. And then it's quite an interesting article. It's a 21-year-old and a 20-year-old. They say the sunflowers is worth 84.2 million. I think it's important to say that the artwork wasn't actually damaged because it's covered in like a layer of glazing. So you might actually say, almost like in the Kylie Rodney case, don't hurt them, don't arrest them, don't prosecute them. They had an important message, but they were young and they should be forgiven. I'm not sure I agree with that. To me, this is vandalism. And yes, I'm not sure I agree with that. Also, it's going to possibly inspire similar vandalism for attention. And what happens here is social media loves this. It's shock and awe, and it goes around the world. And so someone else is going to try and do something shocking and sensational, but guess what it is? It's destructive. It's taking something that is an important symbol, an important legacy, an important heritage, and destroying it and saying, I'm going to prop myself in front of that. Ha, 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 look how important I am. Right? I'm going to prop myself in front of a famous artwork, and then I'm going to become the topic of the time. That shouldn't be encouraged. But I can tell you now, that's going to work on social media. That is basically tabloid sensationalism to a T, right? So I do think they need to be punished in some way, right? Laurie, good to have you here. Welcome, Laurie. Yeah, it's about them. It is a heritage that belongs to all of humanity. So in this article, let's just go back to it. I think it's that one. So let's have another look at what happens here. So I'm going to just bring it up to full screen. You see how close they come to actually hitting the painting with those cans. Let me show you again. Do you see how close they come to actually hitting the physical painting directly?
Security!
So now you're going to hear her speech.
What is worth more, art or life? Is it worth more than food? Worth more than justice? Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people? The cost of living crisis is part of the cost of oil crisis. Fuel.
So she's about to make an argument now about something about you must stop oil, and that's going to solve the cost of living or something like that. So stop pumping oil. And you know what this actually shows? A chronic misunderstanding of how it works. So right now, there's a lack of oil because of the war in Ukraine, right? Because of sanctions against Russia. That is what's pushing all these energy prices up. So although it's true that we need to invest in alternative energy, right now the answer isn't to just stop oil. Because if you just stop oil, you would push you'd make things even more unaffordable. Because right now, where do you think electricity comes from? Largely from fossil fuels. So the mere reasoning here is dumb, incomplete, defective, irrational, unreasonable. It's not just stop oil. It is actually you need to develop a process that you replace it with, right? And that's not so easy to do. You might need to go to the nuclear route, or you might need to ramp up your solar energy, but it's certainly not something that can be easily remedied. And it's not just stop oil. And you kind of get the feeling that, is this person educated enough? It seems like she knows what she's talking about. I mean, climate change does matter, but just stop oil isn't the solution, right? And that's why I say the attention-seeking aspect tends to give credence. I don't know. I haven't really investigated. I don't know what her backstory is, but I get the feeling it's not very well founded on science or facts. Just stop oil. I don't know what their memo is or their memorandum is. Anyway, let's listen to her explain just stop oil, okay?
Is unaffordable to millions of cold, hungry families. They can't even afford to heat a tin of soup. Meanwhile, crops are failing. Millions of people are dying in monsoons, wildfires, and severe drought. We cannot afford new oil and gas. It is going to take everything we know and love.
Yeah, so what do you guys think about that? So it's been viewed 3.5 million times because it's Van Gogh. If they threw that on a Van Rappard, it might have gotten 35 views. I think that's quite funny. If they threw that on a Van Rappard, maybe it would have gotten 35 views. Yeah, Thanks for that. Yeah, that's also very true. Also very true. So this is quite a good article. There's some interesting tweets that it highlights. If you're going to have a climate protest at the museum, I feel it ought to be about returning stolen art artifacts to colonized nations and pointing out the connections between climate change and colonialism, not this. So I'm not really sure what I think about that. But there's some interesting tweets. Here's another one. I agree that the target could have been different. The painting was not damaged, and while we may dislike the method, the actual message is worth listening to. Yeah, sort of true. There's also this one. Doing TikTok commentary on the tomato soup Van Gogh incident today, isn't this type inevitable as museum and commercial art interests cozy up to the ultra wealthy? Anyway, there you go for that. Someone made I thought, quite a good argument, which is they said the people who would care least about climate change, and I don't know whether it's true or not, I haven't really thought about it, but somebody said the people who would care the least, not really climate change, but about oil companies and about fossil fuels, they say would be art people. You know, there's not like an overlap in people who care about art and sort of economists and those who know the extraction industry. And I tend to agree with that. I tend to think, yeah, like art folk aren't kind of going to go, oh, let's dial up the number for the CEO of BP. They just wouldn't, they don't move in those circles. If you instead went to some kind of engineering faculty or some kind of display that had to do with engineering, or you defaced a bridge or something. I'm just saying something that is related to engineering, or a very valuable thing related to geology. That might get the attention of the people you want to get attention. Geologists, engineers, you know what I mean? So here's another one. As if damaging art and wasting food will win people over to your cause. I think that's quite what's quite ironic with this whole thing is they're throwing food at art, and they're saying something about life is precious and food is precious, but they're throwing food kind of away. Again, it's a broken message, you know. So anyway, there's some interesting commentary about how the media responds to this. Here's another one. They say that the normal way hasn't worked, but the alternative is simply uncompelling. They flog the dead horse of enhanced awareness, raising by resurrecting the approach of early XR, but with less people. Yeah, here's another version of that. Is this particular artwork? I guess that didn't get enough attention. Anyway, there are some kind of quite interesting comments on social media about that. Okay, I'm going to wrap up now. I wanted to go into this in a lot more detail, but it's just we're about at 2 hours, and I don't really want to stay on for much longer. But what I do want to say is that you need to direct your eye in the right place. Oil companies, government, but all of that's boring. Social media won't really care about that. So a fake stunt will get attention, right? The other thing I want to say to you guys is, you know, if you remember correctly, before the Rodney case, I'd actually already withdrawn a little bit from true crime. Do you remember? Before the Rodney case, we were doing a lot of Van Gogh letters, and I was complaining in a way that every time I do a Van Gogh letters, I lose 10 to 20 subscribers. And I kind of had the attitude of I don't really care about that. But the point is that I had already withdrawn quite a lot from the true crime space. Part of that was being quite pissed off with the Deaf versus Heard aftermath, right? But the point is, before the Kylie Rodney case, I'd actually already, if you remember correctly, I'd actually already withdrawn into quite a lot of Van Gogh letters. I think we were doing them twice a week. When the Kylie Rodney case came along, if you remember correctly, I kind of said, I'm going to put Van Gogh letters on the back burner because in lieu of trying to grow my channel a little bit. And that's exactly what I did. I sort of grew it by around about 6,000 subscribers. So from, I think it was 86,000, my channel was on 86,000 almost the whole year, sort of flatlined at 86. And then it got a bit of a bump thanks to the Rodney case. Only 6,000. There were other channels that got 5 times as much. There were other channels that got 7 times as much, right? There was one channel that I think went from, I don't know, 1,000 or 2,000 subs to over 30,000. So built his entire channel on the Rodney case, like up to 30,000 subscribers, whereas mine only got 6,000. And I mean, the video I put up earlier today, at one point I lost 10 subscribers just talking about the one dealing with protecting a teenager's right to privacy. People didn't like that minus 10 subscribers, 10, 15 subscribers. All I'm trying to say is the place I was at before the Rodney case, the disillusionment, the distrust, the kind of disrespect hasn't really changed subsequently. In fact, it's been reinforced, right? And so I think it's only natural to sort of withdraw again. How much is the question? It's not like stopping. It's just a certain amount of withdrawal. It's a certain amount of not participating in a particular environment and kind of making your own, fjording your own path. Just like Vincent van Gogh did, where he said, you know what, I'm going to paint according to my own technique. I'm going to think about things my way. I'm kind of doing the same thing, right? Stephanie says, tonight was the worst live I've moderated forever in regards to behavior and disrespect. This is lovely. I do not miss all that. Now, Stephanie, that live that I did before this, I don't know if I've ever blocked so many people in one live. And I thought I was quite lenient. I thought I could have easily have blocked double the amount of people that I did block. And it's just an ugly, nasty, dumb, disrespectful environment. It doesn't make any sense. You can't work sensibly with people like that. And then it's to your credit if you don't. Otherwise, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your effort with fools and with stupid, whatever that is. There is a method to all of that, making money and all of their allegiances. But, if you want to make your time well spent, you need to, navigate your own path. And I want to kind of encourage you guys to do that. That's #Team Peachtree. That's building your nest, and it doesn't really matter what happens ultimately and what people think of that. Nevertheless, find another garden and where your work is going to come to some kind of fruition, right? So it's not being defeated. It's being realistic. It's not being what's the word? Yeah, it's basically being an intelligent, living person that responds to the environment. that's what we need to do, and we need to do it without without rudeness, without vengeance, without spite, without nastiness. I think a little bit of anger is justified. I think if you're not angry that your time has been wasted, or angry that people are being idiotic, then there's something wrong with you. You should be angry if someone's wasted your time. You should be angry if you built 7 nests and you've got nothing to show for it, but not so angry that you cannot function. So you've got to come out of that where you say, you don't fixate on what you didn't do, you couldn't do, or didn't work out. Instead, you focus on what you can do, what you are doing, and what you want to do, right? Doesn't that make sense? You need to watch your health as well. I really feel I've looked at a lot of my videos, and I look a lot less healthy and a lot less happy, a lot less, I don't know. I feel like my face had a bit of a liveliness that it's lost, and a bit of a sparkle, a twinkle to the eye. I just think that I've also looked a bit leaner, and I don't really have that. I think I've lost some of my shine from mucking about in the mud with people who don't really care anyway, right? So I want to kind of get back to that, and it's not a sign of defeat. It's a sign of being adaptive, not maladaptive, and not stubborn, but the opposite. That you're able to pick your battles, and so I'll obviously come back into true crime when there's a case that I want to deal with. And it's not like I won't deal with true crime at all. It's just a different way of dealing with it. Does that make sense? Makes sense. Cool. Yeah. Nisi says you will get it back by following your new path that's best for you. So just to be a little bit mercenary, I was really hoping that while covering the Kylie Rodney case, I would hit 100,000 subscribers. So I really just needed to increase my channel by about 13,000. That's way less than a lot of other channels. There were other channels that grew by 30,000, 40,000 subscribers. So I was really just looking, maybe I can grow my channel by about 10, 13,000 subscribers and get to or very close to 100,000. And, that was a milestone I was working towards. And I worked very hard. I made a lot of videos. I put in a lot of effort. And I didn't get the kind of reward that a lot of other channels got for about the same kind of work. Also, I could have made it a lot easier for myself. I could have interviewed AWP. I could have played some sort of double agent thing. I could have really, that whole thing where I pretended to apologize to the foul play community. I could have taken that further. It's just not who I am. And so as a result, it's much harder for me to grow my channel than a lot of these other popular channels. I'm doing a lot more work for a lot less. And that takes courage. It takes a few punches to the gut. It takes quite a lot. But there's a sense that we are the good guys. We are actually the good guys in this community. I genuinely believe that, and I genuinely think that that's not true. It's true. Cool. Thanks, Stephanie. It is a sign of growth, yeah. So in a way, it's this idea of growing like that peach tree where there's not that much light, but having faith and confidence that you're going to find your way to it. And that while your struggle is different to someone else's, and maybe doesn't feel completely fair, sometimes that can actually be a benefit to you. Working harder for the same thing can often make you stronger than someone else where it comes easy, because easy come, easy go, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if this weaver has now succeeded in building a nest, and it's just so much sweeter. The fact that after all that effort, he's in a place where it is good enough and he can start a family. And next summer, it'll probably be so much easier to build the first nest rather than 7, right? That is how it works. You get better by learning from your mistakes, right? And I think it is a mistake to stay in a space and keep kicking at a door. You're not going to get anywhere. Go to a different garden. And when you are ready, you come back out like we saw in this. When you're ready, you come out all guns blazing like that. That's a bird that believes in itself, right? Even after it's lost 7 nests. I don't know which one is the real one, but it's one of them.
Oh, it's a posturing battle, but still a battle.
Okay, so we had 2 hours, 11 minutes. I think that is it. It's been quite a long night for me, but I think quite a good one. Those are 2 birds that don't lack for self-belief, right?
Jimmy, do you want to go for a walk?
Okay, well, that's it from my side. I just want to thank Stephanie for sending through those awesome clips. I want to thank all these members for being here. It was really, I really did enjoy this subject matter. And then, you know, I don't know how often we're going to be doing this. I imagine it might be once a week now, but we'll see. But I definitely want to get back into a regular schedule, not only with this, but also the Despicable book on Amanda Knox. I've so many times gotten everything ready and then something happens and it distracts me from that. I kind of want to get back to basics in a way, covering the audio books and TCRS Book Club. That's something else to look forward to. Make sure you order that book if you want to participate. That's going to be members only quite soon as well. I want to do more and more members only stuff. I feel like my work is too much casting pearls before swine kind of thing. That's generally how I feel. And I'd rather have you guys protected from that as well. Not just me, you guys as well. And so there's going to be more members only stuff. I'm going to just gradually do it, gradually make it, you know, just us guys. So that's the idea. That's the plan. You'll continue to grow in a different direction. I think it's that and not that. Thanks, Stephanie. It's that and not that. So just like with Vincent van Gogh, he didn't stop doing art. So I'm not going to stop doing true crime. It's just a different application in a way. So although I'm going to be doing true crime, I also want to be talking about world affairs and meaningful things. I didn't cover the war in Ukraine because it did literally, the tensions did de-escalate. I'm still watching that. We'll see what happens next week. But I mean, the reason I covered it was because it was looking quite dangerous and quite serious. If that turns again, and it may next week, this month is really crucial, then I will cover it again. But what I'm trying to say is I don't want to be so anal and so insular in just covering a high-profile case for views. I want us to think about our world. I want us to think about ourselves in the world. Van Gogh is part of that. TCRS Book Club is part of that. Just having a more flexible mindset is part of that as well. And I think in that way, we can distinguish ourselves from the rest of true crime that is so like a stuck record. High profile case, we all like bees go to the same honeypot every time, and we all talk about the same thing. Let's be different to that. Let's talk about things that actually matter and true crime, but also bring our special true crime rocket science nous to that when it needs that. And I kind of want to ask you guys for your advice. So where you could say, Nick, maybe we should cover this. This is important, right? I didn't think the Stockton serial killer was something I wanted to cover. I didn't think Debbie Collier was something I wanted to cover. There is a case where 4 bicyclists went missing near a bridge, but for some reason, maybe because of what happened to my friend Alex, I wasn't sure if I wanted to cover that. Letitia Stork is maybe something I do want to cover. But what I want to leave with you guys is, if you feel in your heart this is a case that is high profile, I don't like how true crime are covering it, or I think this is important, or whatever, I think this resonates, let's cover this, then I'll definitely consider it. And I might drop everything again and we can cover that properly. We'll see what is deserved, right? That's the plan, that's the process, that's the protocol I want to follow. So it's really important that my members, that you guys especially, know that and are on board with that, so that it's not like, what's going on? Why is it going this way? Why is it going that way? There's a mindset that we're trying to approach what we do within this mindset, right? Yeah, thanks a lot, Stephanie, about that. Also, you guys are more than welcome to suggest your own books for TCRS Book Club. I would much rather get your suggestions than from a sort of a random subscriber. So I'd much rather get your, let's talk about this book, even if it's a book you read 10 years ago. The book that we about to review was read by a very good friend of mine in the UK, that she says she's read it 3 times. And to be honest, I haven't actually read it yet. I've ordered it, but I think it's what I want to talk about. And I know what a great person she is, and I really respect her opinion. And I think it's something we might want to talk about. Hopefully it is. Hopefully the writing is good. But you are more than welcome to make your own suggestions. I do want to talk about Lullaby maybe after this TCRS Book Club. So we'll see. I will try and get hold of the author of Flatwater Tuesday. It would be great to speak to Ron Irwin. He's a great person, great guy, and great author. I would love to talk to him, and we can definitely revisit this as often as you guys want to. Okay. So, Susanna, thank you so much for that. And I think that is it from me. I really like this background. It's so fresh, and I think I look quite fresh and refreshed in it. The contrast of this to that, it kind of works, right? The bright yellow to this sort of color kind of works quite well. Okay. Yeah, Gannon. Cool. Renee says, which patron should a member join in on? I don't understand that yet. If you want to get access to the audiobooks, the $5 channel has one level of shorter audiobooks. They're around about 10. And then there's the $10 tier that has longer audiobooks. So you can either, if you want that, if you're not interested in the audiobooks, you can join the $2 tier. So it's either, I would say, $2 or $5 or $10. $10 obviously gives you access to all of that, all the audiobooks and all the content on the sort of lower tiers. Cool. Corina says we'll keep that in mind. Nisi says perfect background. Nisi, is also great to have you here. I know you're a big supporter and a fan and interested in Van Gogh. You were definitely very effusive and could see the enthusiasm when you heard that it was episode 31 coming up. So I will try and do 32 by maybe Sunday, around about this time Sunday next week. So look out for that. Stephanie says $10 is the best if you're able to. Cool. Okay, guys, thanks a lot for being here. I love you. I really appreciate you. I'm sorry that Terry's not here, but maybe she'll catch us on the replay. But otherwise, really good to see you guys again. And I always find these Van Gogh letters so edifying. I feel like his journey is so important because of the way he struggled and the way he found his way in his own way. And, you know, it in a way it brushes aside the rules of society, and it makes a place for someone who creates their own identity. And that's something that I feel is lacking, you know, deep identity. And that's something I feel we are doing, me and you, me as an individual, you as individuals, but also us collectively. And that's such a great journey to be on together. So that's really cool. Yes, that is per month. But I mean, you can try and listen to 3, 4, 5, 6 audiobooks in 1 month if you want to binge listen. But that is per month. You can also pay in advance per year, and you can then get a 10% discount. So if you pay per year, you can get a 10% discount on that. So there you go. It is a breath of breath. It is a breath of fresh air, and the weavers become a favorite part, intertextuality. Yeah, so we've got hashtag Team Peachtree. I think we need another one, something about hashtag keep weaving, right? Hashtag keep weaving. Okay, cool. Karina, it's late. It's 3:20 in the morning. Sleep well. Anyone else in the UK, sleep well. Those in the States, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And I'll see you guys next time. Keep it real.